ladies and gentlemen, we have so much to talk about and so little time before the sun sets. To begin with, I left my microphone back in the United States, so we are stuck with these earbuds until I can get another microphone. In case you couldn't tell by the very foreign-looking outlets over there, I am not in the United States, and I will not be for a hot minute. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about is some very big changes that this channel is going to go through. Not really, just some pretty big changes happening to your host. That's right, in case it wasn't obvious based on the title, I will be and have already started going on testosterone. I thought I'd let you guys know so that you didn't feel caught off guard and it didn't come out of nowhere, because I have my whole thing on my YouTube channel has been I'm a dysphoric masculine female who's doing everything I can to avoid transitioning medically, and the dam finally broke and now I'm finally doing that. My values are not going to change. I will not force anyone to call me he. I will not force anyone to call me a guy. You are welcome to continue calling me a woman and continue calling me she. I mean, I'm just going to be a female on steroids and possibly with surgeries. I do not want to see any comments saying we have lost another cute tomboy. That pisses me off. I was never going to date you in the first place, and even if you weren't delusional enough to think I was going to date you, I do not exist to be tomboy eye candy for you. I personally struggle when I meet trans people to take them seriously as the gender they are living as. That includes myself. We are not hypocrites on this channel. I mean, we are sometimes, but not about this. And I also think adults should be allowed to medically transition. I mean, as soon as I broke up with my ex-boyfriend, I immediately tried to start transitioning as soon as possible because I had known I'd wanted to for years. And because I live in California, I was able to get access to testosterone within like 2 weeks. So if you're an adult and you're struggling to get access to HRT, go to California where they hand out HRT like candy. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I ended up deciding to do this. I was 9 years old when I began experiencing the symptoms of what would later become full-blown gender dysphoria. Now, as every other girl my age, I was uncomfortable going through puberty. I absolutely hate hearing trans people talking about how they struggled with puberty more than the average child, because that's not fair to say. It's not true. It's rather self-absorbed. Every girl I knew growing up was deeply uncomfortable with going through puberty. The main difference between them and me is that they eventually grew out of it and became okay with their body, whereas it just progressively got worse for me. I don't know if you've ever read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, but I have no idea who Judy Blume was talking to. That universe does not exist. There is no universe where a bunch of girls gather together and compete to see who can go through puberty the fastest. It doesn't make any sense to me that the girls in that story were so excited to get their periods. That's not real. That's not a real universe. Judy Blume is on something. By the time I was 14, I began kind of wanting to go through male puberty. With my guy friends, I would be like,
when's my voice gonna drop? How come I'm being left behind?
In a very jokey way, I would often look for signs in the mirror to see if I was getting any dark upper lip hairs. I remember actually a couple years before this, kind of delusionally hoping that I might be a little bit intersex or infertile or partially male in some way, because I didn't exactly understand how female reproductive systems worked, and so things were happening to my body that were actually really normal, but I thought were signs that I was intersex. I first learned about trans people when I was 12 years old. I read a book called George by Alex Gino, which is now called Melissa, even though George never goes by Melissa in the book, except George experiments with the name Melissa in the last couple of chapters. George is about an 8-year-old dysphoric trans girl, so obviously I did not relate to George. Shortly afterward, I read a book which I think was called The Other Boy. I do not remember who wrote it, but it was about an 11-year-old trans guy, I think, and again, I didn't relate because I did not relate to being a stealth trans guy in middle school. I never related to any of the stories I read about trans people. I definitely felt a strong connection to them, but I don't really think that meant anything. And I think that's because at the time, in the 2010s, when all this trans literature was coming out, the trans guys were very, very dysphoric, masculine females, and the trans girls were very, very dysphoric feminine males. And I wasn't a hyper masculine girl. I was just a very dysphoric girl. And I knew what dysphoria was, and I knew I had symptoms of it, and I knew it came and went. From the ages of 14 onward, I would have moments where I would just want to rip off my skin so badly, and I would sometimes go for days wearing 3 to 4 pairs of t-shirts over each other so that I looked flatter and I could stand my body more. And then sometimes that would go away and I would be okay wearing just a t-shirt and a sports bra under it. I just remembered this now, but when I was doing theater my entire 4 years of high school, I remember in as early as 9th grade, when I would do improv and I would be expected to play a girly character, I would get really close to having a meltdown just because I really did not want to be perceived as a girl character or a feminine character. The horrible feeling of wanting to rip my skin off began persisting once I turned 17. Once I turned 17, that feeling just kind of sank in and it didn't stop. It didn't stop after a few days. It didn't stop after a few months. It just kept on going to the point where I felt like I couldn't go outside unless people were rating me as male. I recently watched a video I posted called Why I Use All Pronouns, where I was desperately coping with the fact that I wished people would see me as a guy, but I felt like it would be a sin to admit that to myself and admit that to the world.
I was tempted to tell people who were asking my pronouns that I was a he, him. I decided that I would just be good with anything.
I mentioned someone being in my life, and that would have been my ex-girlfriend, who was recently starting to go as a boy online. And it was influencing me to do the same. That's not exactly what happened. What happened was I told her that I had terrible gender dysphoria, and she was like, oh, me too. And then she chopped her hair short and dyed it black and started telling everybody online that she was male without really telling me first. So she got mad at me when I called her my girlfriend, even though I didn't know that whole thing was happening. Now, when I found out this was happening, I told her, okay, well, if you're a guy, I'm also a guy, so call me a guy too. And she would be like, no, you're more of a girl boy. I've seen your feminine side. I cannot take her seriously as a guy. She didn't look like a guy, she didn't act like a guy, and she didn't treat me like a guy. So it was like she was the only one who was allowed to be a guy. I feel like she would often post photos or send me photos to trigger my dysphoria, where she would use filters to try to make herself look more like a guy because she knew that I passed more than her. And she didn't even seem to really want to actually look like a guy, but she did want to screw with my body insecurities. Unlike her, I felt very guilty about asking people on the internet to call me a guy, so I would just say I use any pronouns because I would rather people assume I was a guy without me outright asking them to. And because I had a very androgynous face and I had short hair, more than half of the people thought I was a guy, or at least the ones who didn't thought I was a trans guy and treated me as such. The first time I socially transitioned was when I was about 17. I was taking an elective my senior year of high school, and there were about 12 people in the class, and like 3 of them identified as non-binary. And because this was 2021 and 2022, the height of comedy for teenagers was identity-based jokes and insults. So obviously the jokey insult for me was
being a white girl.
I already had crippling dysphoria at this point, so that just compounded it and made it worse. Not that it's okay to make jokes like that if that makes anyone uncomfortable, but it made me particularly uncomfortable because I really hated the idea that I identified as a girl. So at some point I exploded and I told the group chat,
hey, I would rather be perceived as more masculine than more feminine.
I mean, that's not a lie. Masculinity is an aesthetic, not an identity. And in class the next day, one of the self-identifying gender fluid students came up to me and asked if I had a preferred name to go by, and I just gave them a masculinized version of the name my parents gave me. It felt easier than to go by the name I thought I might want to go by, which is the name I go by now. Most of you probably already know what it is. It's not Othniel. That would be sick, but most people could not be able to pronounce it. I remember one of my non-binary male classmates asking me what my preferred pronouns are, and this classmate was very open that he just didn't care about gender at all. Therefore, he felt like he couldn't be a cis guy because he didn't have a strong gender identity. But because of that, he felt like he currently goes by the label gender void and uses all pronouns, but still, looks pretty normal. He's a sweet guy. I love him to death. But when he was just telling me, yeah, I don't really care. Like, if I woke up as a girl, I wouldn't really care. And he was asking me my pronouns. I was just like, he, him. And I felt so guilty about it. I felt so guilty about that at the time. Now, when I broke up with my ex, I went back into the closet. I desisted, which is basically detransitioning, but without the medical aspect, because I never went on testosterone. When I was 17, I didn't think too much about going on testosterone. Every time I saw a trans man go on testosterone, it did not look good, so I didn't really want to look like what they looked like. And I was okay looking like a boy because, again, I was 17 and I was a child. I honestly think I was a child up until I was 18, maybe even 19, so I didn't feel a desire to look like a grown man. During this period of going from 18 to 19, I became a lot more active on YouTube, and I even had a blog called Curing My Gender Dysphoria or something, where I wrote articles about forcing myself to become comfortable with my body and to become comfortable with femininity. Basically, DIYing exposure response prevention therapy, where I would go outside wearing a dress, or I would force myself to wear a dress and take pictures of me wearing a dress or girly outfits to get myself comfortable with it, to teach me,
hey, it's actually not bad if you do these things.
mind you, didn't work. At the time, I was really, really depressed, mainly because I was traumatized by my ex-girlfriend, and I thought part of my depression was because I was sinning against God by cross-dressing, so I went out of my way to either dress neutral or dress a little bit feminine without getting too feminine, because that made me uncomfortable. And I did this up until I was 19. I tried growing my hair out as well. When I started my first year at college, I pretty quickly met an older trans woman. It's always an older trans woman, is it? I promise, it's not that ominous. But this older trans woman clocked pretty quickly that I was a repper, which is chronic internet speak for a trans repressor. So somebody who knows they're trans and feels dysphoric, but is refusing to transition or come out as trans. So this person just automatically started calling me he, and we would talk a little bit about being trans, and she would be like,
Yeah, I didn't even experience dysphoria until I came out as trans, and then I was like, oh, like, I need to blow dry my hair all the time.
oh, and she would talk about how gender dysphoria based transitioning was toxic or whatever. So I was repping until I joined a musical cast where there was another trans guy there, and he was way more feminine than me, but he was taller than me and he had short hair, and he came in identifying as a guy, so everyone took him seriously as a guy, and it triggered me so badly. I just want to step in for a second and say that just because I happen to get triggered by something does not mean that thing is inherently bad. There was nothing wrong with that guy. He was very nice. He did kind of lead me on a little bit, which was a little bit weird, but he was a nice person. There was nothing wrong with the way he presented. I was just triggered by seeing an out trans guy while I was trying to repress. At this point, I realized I can't do anything in the theater anymore because the theater is overtaken by trans guys who tend to be more on the feminine side, and I don't really get along with them. So, unfortunately, theater has been ruined for me, and I'll never be able to pursue the arts again. I remember the director confronting me and asking me what my pronouns were, and I was like, I'm okay with any. And he was like, but I don't know what that means. Like which ones? Which one should I pick? And I was like, you can just use she, her. And he was like, are you sure? Because I saw a video that was linked to your Facebook page where you basically said you hated she, her pronouns. And I was like, yeah, no, like, it's literally okay. You can call me she, her. I really don't care. Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. Fast forward a month later, I'm having a panic attack in the women's bathroom crying about how I wish I was a boy. And the stage manager came in and was like, are you trans? No, I'm not trans. I'm literally a normal woman. But do you identify as a guy? I mean, okay, yeah, I guess so. Well, why didn't you just tell us? I'm sorry. And the director was like, I literally asked you. And I was like, I know, I'm sorry. It's not your fault. So my hair was already short at this point. I had cut off my hair because I wanted to take a male ensemble role instead of a female ensemble role. And I know, guys, I did something very bad. I changed in the men's dressing room. I know. Honestly, my views when it comes to gendered spaces is not for locker rooms. I think trans people should have separate locker rooms. I mean, I don't even change in the locker room anyway when I go to the gym. But I feel like bathrooms should just have ceiling to floor cubicles, but I feel like there should be a women's bathroom and an everyone bathroom. So if you are a biological woman, you go in one, because not all biological women, but a lot of them have expressed throughout the board that they're uncomfortable with trans women in the women's bathroom. That makes sense to me. I also feel like it wouldn't really work if a transitioned trans man goes in the women's bathroom too. I have made women uncomfortable in the bathroom. So I feel like there should be a women's bathroom and an everyone bathroom, because generally speaking, men are not super uncomfortable if women go into their bathroom, unless women are being weird. But guys, drop in the comments if a woman has ever been weird in the men's room. I wouldn't, because I'm not attracted to men. I socially transitioned as a guy for the second time. I again went by a masculinized version of the name my parents gave me because it felt easier than having them switch from that name to a completely different name that I actually wanted to go by. And I did that, and after I left the musical, I never looked back. I was like, I'm never doing that again. I could never do theater as a cis woman. I'm always just going to get triggered by the trans guys doing theater to come out again. And I'm not going to want to do theater again unless I have a deep voice and can play a male role, so it's just not going to work for me. How ironic. Maybe I will go back to the theater once I completely pass as a man. I, again, went back into the closet. I grew out my hair, and so something that was happening at the time, so this is when I'm going to talk about my relationship, because I would not have started transitioning had I not broken up with my ex-boyfriend. So I met my ex-boyfriend when I was 18 and he was 34. He did not know me before I was 18. He didn't wait for me to turn 18. Yes, it's a really bad age gap. I do acknowledge that, but I will not be taking any accusation seriously that I was underage. This started in January 2023, literally January 1st, 2023. It lasted 8 months. The first 8 months were really, really bad. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it will make him look really bad, so we're not going to talk about that, but just know it was pretty toxic. And by the time it ended, I realized I think I actually do want to transition. He was behind me. I was going through kind of a breakup euphoria. I felt good. I didn't feel depressed anymore. And the one thing that remained was crippling gender dysphoria. And I realized I'm 19 now. I still look like a 12-year-old boy. I don't want to look like a 12-year-old boy. I want to be male. I do not want to look like a grown woman. My only options if I want to look like a grown-up are a grown woman or a grown man. I would much rather look like a grown man. And I got really excited about the idea of taking testosterone. The only thing I wasn't necessarily excited about or cared about was having male reproductive organs. I did not like what I had, but I already found male bodies too repulsive to actually want that part of being male. That would later change, fast forward, when my ex-boyfriend and I got back together and we actually were kind of intimate, and I actually realized what I was missing out on, and I realized I'm missing the hell out on having male anatomy. So when I was 19, I decided I wanted to go on testosterone, and I told a few people about this. I decided to give myself a year. I decided to wait until the fall of 2024 before I would actively start pursuing transitioning, because I knew I hadn't wanted to be a man that long, and I had time to change my mind, and I was still a teenager. I ended up, at the beginning of 2024, having a conversation with a Christian woman because I wanted her input. I didn't expect her to agree with me, but I knew she would be kind and understanding about it, so I wanted to talk to her about this. I told her, I really want to transition. What are your thoughts on this? And she told me about how she and her either boyfriend or fiance were living together, and they weren't married yet. And because of that, they were not allowed to become members of this church. And because of that, she felt very far away from God. And she just seemed so sad. And actually, fast forward, it's 2026 now. The two of them are married, and they have become members of that church. So yay, that got resolved. My gender dysphoria did not get resolved, though. And she just seemed so sad to be so far away from God. And I was like, I already feel kind of far away from God. I don't want to transition if it makes me even further away from God. 2024 ended up being the worst year of my life for a lot of different reasons. I actually seriously did contemplate ending myself. I had a date, I had a plan, and what kind of actually helped was getting back together with my ex-boyfriend. The reason was because he was sweet, he was understanding, he was a good listener, he was really, really good at comforting me and emotionally regulating me, and things were going great, and it made not transitioning worth it until it didn't. I will talk about this because he's very open about this. We still talk to each other. He has not backed down from this. So I'm willing to share this much about the relationship. My ex-boyfriend had a really hard time communicating his feelings without kind of turning them into insults. He did not mean to insult me, but if I told him that it hurt my feelings, he would say, well, there was just no better way to say it. For instance, when I would pick out Victorian boy outfits from the store, which, if you've looked at my YouTube channel, I wear Victorian boy outfits as early as 16 years old, so I'd been doing this before I met him, so this should not have been a surprise to him. But when I would do that and I would find these clothes and get excited about them, he would be like, ew, or I can't believe you like this. Do you actually like this? Really? And it would just really hurt my feelings because getting this outfit would be really exciting to me. And I told him several times, if you don't like it, don't tell me. And he'd be like, what, you want me to lie? No, I just don't want you to tell me that you don't like it. I didn't ask you. Then I don't want to know. But he did feel pretty deeply affected by me wearing masculine outfits. The rule basically was if I medically transitioned, we would break up. So I didn't medically transition. I just did everything I could to relieve my dysphoria that wasn't medically transitioning. Ultimately, what ended us was he would just say a lot of things that made me feel like I was going insane, made me feel like I was unreasonable. When we would have conversations about it, they wouldn't get resolved. And yeah, he would just say a lot of things that hurt my feelings, that could have been expressed in a different way that didn't hurt my feelings. And when I suggested this, he wouldn't do it. And I realized that he was no longer emotionally fulfilling me. He was no longer comforting me. He was no longer fulfilling the roles that made me fall in love with him in the first place. I can't do this anymore. And that's why we broke up. We did not break up because I wanted to transition. But as soon as we did break up, I was like, I need to transition now because I have wanted to transition for years. I was thinking about transitioning late 2024, but that's when he and I got back together, so there's no chance of me transitioning then. But now that we've broken up, I decided to pursue transitioning because I had known I'd wanted to do this for years. The reason I decided to pursue transitioning was because I had pursued a man that I loved that, he knew I wasn't attracted to men. We were very open about that with each other, but we still loved each other. We loved each other's company, and we wanted to build a life together regardless. And he wasn't a Christian, and I knew that God wasn't necessarily blessing the relationship. At the same time, I also felt like he had given my boyfriend to me just because of the deep connection we'd had and how happy and safe he made me feel. So it no longer necessarily became a priority to follow the same values as my parents in order to please God. I stopped thinking that transitioning was going to necessarily pull me away from God. That became less my priority, and the bigger priority became being comfortable. Gender dysphoria was creeping into every aspect of my life. It was creeping into my friendships, my relationships, even the church, just being put in the women's category. At the beginning of 2026, when my ex-boyfriend and I were still together, I started socially transitioning for the third time at my college. I had a horrible fall 2025 semester, and part of that was due to feeling dysphoric, and I thought that having short hair and going by the name I wanted to go by, not just the masculinized version of the name that my parents gave me, I thought that would make me feel better. In fact, I even had a teacher who had us write our name and our pronouns on our name tag, and I just went with he, him. Guys, I did a terrible thing. I did a horrible, terrible thing. I corrected my pronouns. When people called me she. I know, I'm such a hypocrite. And it made me feel a lot more comfortable. And I realized that medically transitioning would make me feel a lot more comfortable too. Now the floor is yours for questions. You're welcome to try to talk me out of this. Number one, it's kind of too late. Number two, I have heard it all before. If you're respectful, you can. You can say whatever as long as it's respectful. If you're intentionally being malicious, I do reserve the right to delete comments. I am really not looking forward to being a part of the trans community though, because nowhere will you find the patriarchy worse and more pervasive than within the trans community. I might make a video about this, but it'll probably make everybody upset. So I might not, but let me know if you want to hear it.